Like Jesus didn't say, I came for the people who had it all figured out. He said, I came for the people who don't have it figured out. I came for the people who are like on the edge of society that other people call an abomination. Like, that's who I'm here for.
Can science and faith really coexist? Are people who believe in God just doing some wishful thinking? And are there actually any scientific evidences that point to a creator? We're going to talk about that today. Welcome back to the Finding Something Real podcast. This is your host, Janelle Wood, and you are listening in for season 7, where we talk with different young women who share their faith stories and allow them the space to ask some tough questions about God and Christianity. Today, our content is being curated by a very special young woman, my niece, Noelle. And Noelle shared openly about her story and her faith questions in our last episode, and again in the episode that we had with Drew Berryessa. If you have not listened to that, we're going to play a quick clip from that first conversation right here.
I don't know. And I think that's why I kind of identify with the being agnostic, because I really don't know
Yeah.
where we came from. And I think a lot of like the hype with religion is like we really want to know where we came from, but also like we're just here. Maybe we're just here, and maybe we can just live our lives happily while we're here, and maybe we don't have to think about where we came from. Because I really don't know, and I don't think anyone does. Nobody actually does to me.
So that was just a snapshot of a deeper discussion with Noelle, where we talked about several different topics. We'll link that episode in the show notes, and you don't want to miss all of Noelle's story. And I'm really excited because Noelle came back for another conversation today. Welcome back, Noelle. I'm glad that you're here. How are you doing?
Yay. I'm doing great. Glad to be here. It's good.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And you said that you were really busy during the season in your life. Lots going
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just life.
Yeah.
Everything.
Hard worker. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So the last time you were here, we had a conversation with my friend Drew. How are you feeling about this podcasting process so far? I know we've got quite a few more recordings that we're going to do together, but what are your thoughts so far?
It's been good so far. It's been very chill and like just nice.
Good. Good. Well,
Yeah.
I'm glad. We like chill and we like nice.
Yeah. I'm gonna grab
Yeah.
my cat. Hold on.
Sounds good.
He is causing disturbances. Goodness.
Oh my goodness. Remind me again of your cat's name.
His name's Dante.
Dante, that's right. Dante's Inferno.
Yeah.
So, Noelle, when you were here the first time, you shared that you seriously doubt whether God even exists. You said science is important to you. And you also said, and this is a quote, you said that connecting with and appreciating the earth and my surroundings brings me peace. Do you mind sharing a bit more about any of that before we dive into this conversation and I introduce our special guest?
Oh, let's see. Um, Mostly just that like yeah, I do have a very like strong connection to the earth, and it that is kind of my form of spirituality and like mindfulness, is to spend time in nature and kind of think and really like reflect on my life and things happening in it and appreciate where I live, because I live in a very beautiful, I live in Bellingham, which is a gorgeous city. It's got everything for everyone. So it's wonderful. And yeah, it is peaceful to spend time in nature, in the earth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just a quick follow up to that. I know I also looped that into something else you said, which was that you seriously doubt God's existence. What's made you doubt his existence in relationship to the fact that the earth is so beautiful and you appreciate it so much? What is it about? Is that related at all, or is it completely unrelated in your mind?
I guess the beauty of the earth is not proof to me that there is a God. Um, I think that we can appreciate the earth um, without like attaching a creator to it. Um, Not to say that I don't think there was ever a creator. I'm 100% sure on that, but yeah, looking at the earth and like being in the earth and like being in like the forest and the woods, um it doesn't really like prove to me that there's a god.
Mm.
um and it kind of spending that time in nature, like very like just like raw, um it kind of like it brings me a sense of peace that I don't believe in God, and that's okay. Um, because I can find spirituality and peace in nature, which is here for me, and I can see it and I
Mm.
can experience it, and it's yeah, it's beautiful.
Mm. Very tangible. Whereas God
Hmm.
is something that you can't see or touch.
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay. Awesome. Well, I'm really glad that you're here to have a discussion with somebody who holds a different worldview than you, but also has a deep appreciation for the earth as well. I'm excited to have her back on today. She loves science and she loves talking about the integration of science and faith, especially with college students. Xandra Grieme received a BS from Colorado State University. Love that school, by the way, and later
Go
studied
Rams.
at the Oxford Center for Christian Apologetics. She continued her studies at Victoria University of Wellington, where she completed a master's degree in conservation biology. By the way, I forgot to double check how to pronounce all these things. I'm just going to try. Let's just try. Her
You're doing
scientific
great.
her scientific research includes work in parasitology, flow cytometry, and ecological restoration. Something close to that. Xandra is passionate about educating others on our role as stewards of the natural world. She's also a returning special guest on this program. Welcome back to the Finding Something Real podcast, Xandra. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad that you're here. A lot has changed since the last time you came on, which was, oh, I don't know, just over 2 years ago, maybe, or maybe it was a year and a
Maybe.
half. I don't know. Um, Tell me, besides the obvious that you have a different last name, what's been going on with you?
Yeah, I got hitched. And, yeah, it's a big deal. um, yeah, I moved back to Colorado and I'm loving being here and hiking. And I didn't realize how much I missed the mountains until I came back.
Mm,
And it's just been so great. I mean, I can see them out my window right now, and they're just like old friends that I missed for a long time. You know what I mean?
yeah.
So that's been really good. And I'm currently working as curator for a digital museum that showcases like the most beautiful things discovered in science,
Mm,
from like out there things, nebula and galaxies and stars, to like the teeniest, tiniest little pollen grain that you have to see under a microscope, and then everything in between. And so that's been a lot of fun. It's definitely challenging, but also just something I really enjoy. So
wow. So, do you bring on a lot of those James Webb images to talk about those on there?
a huge James Webb nerd right now.
Yeah.
Just yeah. Um just the most incredible things. I mean, it's just insane to me how every step up we take, like every little bit deeper we can see into the universe, there's just more and more splendor and beauty and mystery as well.
Hmm.
There's all these puzzles to solve and all these questions to ask. And so in one sense, it makes me feel very, very small when I look at all these James Webb images. I'm like, I'm this tiny speck, in this huge, vast universe. But it also makes me feel really loved,
Mm,
because I think about the one who created these beautiful works of art is how I see them. I see them as artworks. Even he like cares about every person on this planet. Um, so yeah, That's
Wow.
kind of my new gig and what's been keeping me busy lately.
If people
Yeah.
wanted to find out more about your current gig with that online museum, where would they find more information about that?
Well, they can follow us on Instagram. We post a lot of fun stuff, Museum of Created Beauty. Or they can just go to our website. You can create a free membership and start exploring the various rooms inside the museum. And that's just museumofcreatedbeauty.org.
Awesome.
So,
That's
yeah,
awesome.
check it out.
Yeah, when some of those first James Webb images came out, I remember reading some of the scientists' reactions to those images, and I have no idea whether they were secular or believers in any sense of the word, but it was just incredible reading the reactions, which were like, "Oh my gosh, we don't even know what we're looking at right now. These images are just amazing."
Yeah.
Like amazing. And just the awe and the wonder at how detailed and incredible those images are coming from the scientific community, I thought was just really, really, I don't know, just amazing. Tell me about your personal passion for the intersection of science and faith. Where did that come from? What is it about your story that was something that was important to you?
Yeah, I think for a long time I thought that those two things couldn't intersect because science is about making observations of what you can see, and faith is about believing in what you can't see.
Mm,
So I thought those two things were completely contradictory, right? But I think it's because I had the wrong view of what faith was and how it worked. Faith is the assurance of something that you haven't fully seen yet, but you have enough evidence to believe it. And we have this is all over science. I mean, we couldn't do science unless we were able to operate in that way that um, nobody knows what gravity is. We have no idea what gravity
mm,
is, but we know that it operates, on this planet at 9.8 meters per second per second. And we have all these rules that explain how it works. And so we can observe it. And in that sense, we know that it's a real thing, but we don't know what it is. Um, and so there's all kinds of things in science like that are um, mysterious and that we don't fully comprehend, but we still believe that it's real. And I think when that clicked for me, that made it easier for me to say, oh yeah, I have rational reasons for believing in God. Um, I don't think that anyone should believe in him because they're told to or because they were simply raised in a family that believed in God. I don't think anyone should be spoon fed their religion or their political views or anything. I think we all have a responsibility to decide for ourselves what we think is true using our sense of reason and logic. But at the same time, I found myself rejecting a lot of things like a priori, without even looking for the evidence because it fit my needs in some way. And I'm not saying that everybody does that. I'm just saying for my journey, it was important for me to kind of overcome that hurdle and then step into okay, what does this mean if it's real? Or what does this mean if there is a God behind all of this? And wrestling through all of that, because that's not an easy question to ask. And
mhm.
it's not an easy conversation to have. But that's why I know I'll just really respect that you're here, really respect that you're willing to talk with people who have a different viewpoint than you, willing to be open to hearing other people's stories. I just think that's amazing. So kudos.
Yeah, you too. Always. Yes. It's very like eye-opening, and a lot of like problems I think with how polarized our society, specifically in America, has become is a lot to do with the fact that we just don't listen to each other. And I would
Totally.
I would love to try my best to be an active listener and kind of hear what's important to you because that matters.
Mm.
Yeah, ditto.
Xandra, what is your faith journey? Would you tell us, how did Jesus become part of your worldview?
So I was raised by a mom and a dad who actually they went to CSU, same place I met
Nice.
there. Neither of them believed in God, but they came to faith later in life. And so when I was a kid, they were kind of learning how to pray and teaching us how to pray and learning the Bible and teaching us the Bible and stuff. And so we were kind of all on that journey together in a sense. But then when I got a little bit older, I started asking questions about, how do I know this is true? And why should I believe in a God that I can't see? And I had experiences where I thought I had heard from him or really experienced his love. But looking back on that, I started asking, were these just manufactured experiences where people had like moving music or dim lights and they were trying to like get your emotions going so you could feel something that wasn't really there?
Mm.
So I really started going back and thinking, okay, I need to figure this out for myself because I don't want to believe in something that's not true. Even if it makes you feel good, if it's not true, you shouldn't believe in it. That's my viewpoint. So I really kind of went away and started wrestling with that. And then, so I was living in Africa at the time. I was living in Dar es Salaam, and I had some really terrible experiences of suffering. And I think, being raised in the affluent West, I wasn't exposed to a lot of the violence and horrors that a lot of third world countries have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And so living in the slums of Dar es Salaam really exposed me to a lot of horrors that I think at the young age of 20, I was maybe not. I mean, I sold all my possessions and moved there just by myself at the age of 20 because I wanted to volunteer in an AIDS orphanage out there. And so, yeah, I think I returned back to the States, and then I just had a lot of culture shock coming back to the States from that environment. And I just felt like I was surrounded by people who had no idea what was out there, who were living in some kind of fantasy world. And I think there was a part of me that still believed in God. Like there was a part of me that believed that God existed, but I was really angry at him and I did not want anything to do with him. And I was also really scared of men and just scared of people in general. And I kind of went through a phase of like, if I am a scary person, then people won't feel like they can come and hurt me. Like if I hurt them first or something like that. So, yeah, I mean, I like was hanging out with a kind of rough and tumble crowd, and I was in a heavy metal band at this time. I was frontman of a heavy metal band, and I had like a black faux hawk, and I've got all these tattoos and stuff. And not to say it's not wrong to have tattoos or anything like that, but
It's so cool.
yeah,
Oh
Your cool level just went up here because
yes,
with Noelle.
I'm your biggest
oh,
fan.
all right.
Oh my
Oh,
god.
awesome. Are you a heavy metal fan?
I love music and tattoos and
Yeah,
like alternative culture. I think it's great.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Yeah, so yeah, and it's not wrong to be in a heavy metal. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying like at that time I was a really aggressive person. Like I was drinking a lot and all this stuff, and um favorite place was just in the mosh pit just throwing fists and like trying to forget the world or whatever. So yeah, and I think from that point, I mean, the whole story would take a long time to tell, but I will just say that I got hit by a car and was kind of, I didn't have an out of body experience. I know people have described that. I don't know what I had. It was like an inner body experience. It was like the Lord gathered everything that I was and he drew me down into this teeny tiny place deep inside of myself and sat down with me and had a conversation with me and asked, why are you running away from me? You know that I love you. You know that I am for you. I'm not against you. I'm for you. I care about you. And it's time to come back to me. It's time to come home. And so I apologized for a bunch of the stuff that I had been doing that I knew was not the right path to be on. And I said, okay, I'm ready to take you seriously. And I'm ready to take you seriously. And that was a process. It wasn't like an overnight thing. Like I still had to work some stuff out, I mean, I'm still in process. Like, gosh, I'm still have plenty of room for improvement, just a messy human being over here. But that's kind of how the Lord turned me around and kind of brought me back. Because my questions about him, I think, were more, you know, I was confused about the suffering in the world, but I was putting up this front as if it was an intellectual thing. You know, I had all this science in my head that I could use to create like a barrier and say, oh, this is why I'm not letting him in because of these objections. But those weren't actually my objections. My objections were more in the heart, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Noelle, do you relate to any of that story, or what are your thoughts?
I do. I like the story of just like the kind of like personal, like you're struggling in your own life. And I don't know, at least for me, in my life, I I struggle with mental health a lot, and life is hard, and like I understand like the being angry at the world, or like just upset that all of this stuff like is happening, and just yeah, not wanting to like not wanting to believe in someone who might be causing it or watching it happen or able to stop it and isn't. So, but yeah, I like that.
Hmm. Yeah, Xandra, how did you reconcile that, seeing that intense amount of suffering and thinking, okay, God, you could stop it. Why didn't you? Why don't you?
Mm. Yeah, a lot of that I think came back to my understanding of how God operates in the world with us. And so I believe that people have free will, which means people can make a choice to do something or not do something, and that includes myself, right? So if I choose to do something wrong, or I choose to be reckless or something, let's say I'm driving my car and I just choose to be really reckless, and maybe I accidentally have a car accident and hit someone else's car. And then I throw my fists up at God and I say, why did you allow this to happen, God? Well, actually, I ran into another car with my car, right? Um, so there's that side, but then there's also the side of just human corruption and evil, which is so prevalent. And I think that it breaks God's heart more than anyone else's to see that he gave human beings the moral code in our hearts. Like, we know what's right and wrong, you know. And a lot of times we still choose to do the wrong thing. And I think that just tears his heart up. That's not his will for us. So just because something happens in the world does not mean that God condones it. And I think because people say, well, God is all powerful, and therefore anything that happens in the world is from God. No, that is not true. Um, I mean, I had a friend who was sexually assaulted, and someone else who was a Christian said to her, "Well, this must be God's plan for you. Like, he's doing something to make you stronger." And I was like, "No, that's not right. That's not biblical. That's not God's heart for you. God does not want you to go through that kind of stuff." Um and so I think understanding his heart, that, and coming back to the Bible again as well, and actually reading the Bible for what it is, completely changed my view of God completely. Cuz he's not this far away God who's just waiting to smash people with his thumb. He's the God who actually, the Bible says, like, his heart breaks for his brokenhearted daughter. Like, when his daughter has a broken heart, his heart is breaking. um and Noelle, when so I went and heard that first would you say interview or podcast that you did with Janelle. And excuse me, you told the story of, I'm trying to remember if this is right. The guy, you and your girlfriend were at like a pride gathering or something, and some
Mhm.
guy came up to you and got in your face and was like, "You're an abomination," and said that to you. You're an abomination. Said that to
Basic,
your face.
basically, more like just kind of like it wasn't super personal, but it was like you're going to hell, and like I'm gonna wave this
Yeah.
sign in your face, and it was very aggressive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I just want to say, like,
Hate
there are a
that.
lot of things that people do in the name of God that aren't actually his heart.
So sorry.
Your cat does not
Jeez.
want to be held right
He
now.
is going crazy in here.
Creating an
Oh my
inferno.
goodness. Yes.
Yeah, Dante is the good name for
Yeah.
him. Like, well
It's a
named.
perfect name for him. He's
Yeah,
totally a Dante.
Mm.
Oh yeah.
that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, but all that to say,
Yeah.
there are a lot of people who do a lot of evil things in the name of God that are completely counter the heart of Jesus. And it wasn't until I started truly reading the Bible for what it is that I started to see his heart for people. And um, it's a heart of love and reconciliation. And it's not, like Jesus didn't say, I came for the people who had it all figured out. He said, I came for the people who don't have it figured out. I came for the people who are like on the edge of society that other people call an abomination. Like, that's who I'm here for. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I just think of there was a time. So my now husband, he and I were long distance for a year, and it was brutal. Have you ever been in a long distance relationship, Noelle?
Um, maybe not long distance, but like far away, yes.
So you know that feeling, right? It's really hard. So we were long distance for a year, and I remember going to the mailroom in my apartment complex and opening up my mailbox, and there were 2 letters inside, and I pulled out the first one, and it was a letter from the IRS in like red print, and I was like, no. I had this like terrible feeling in my chest, like, oh great, I'm in trouble. And then I looked at the second letter, and it was in the beautiful handwriting of my boyfriend, and I knew it was a love letter for me from him. And I was just immediately like, I can't wait to get home and read this. And I realized, like, that was helpful for me because I realized that I had been approaching the Bible like an IRS letter for a really long time. I'd been approaching it like it was something that was gonna condemn me, and like God was after me to punish me or something, versus what it actually is, which is a love letter,
Mm.
which is, he wants us to know how much he loves us and is for us. Um, anyway, I digress. I don't know how I came from there to there, but yeah.
I like it. Yes.
Yeah, it was good. So a question for you, Xandra. Did you ever feel I just heard this the other day, and I think it's something that maybe people think but don't always voice. It's this idea that people who believe in God maybe are a little less intelligent, or they're checking their brains at the door. Maybe it's wishful thinking, but there's no evidence. Do you ever feel, as a biologist or as somebody who loves science, that you do have to separate the two because it causes a cognitive dissonance for you to love science and love Jesus?
Good question. I wouldn't say it causes a cognitive dissonance. In the way that I view it, it's actually a broadening of my perspective because I have, how can I explain it? I have a wider like way to go to see. Um for example, so I was the only Christian in my cohort in my master's degree, and we were doing a lot of field work on the South Island, in this place called Abel Tasman, which is just a really beautiful area.
New
And
Zealand?
yeah, New
Okay,
Zealand. Sorry,
that's good.
New Zealand. And yeah, and so anyway, there were this population of rats that had come in, and they were eating all the eggs of all the birds. So the bird populations were declining because they couldn't reproduce enough to like keep living. I mean, they were basically just disappearing by the droves because of these rats. And this group of scientists had tried everything to get rid of the rats. And there was this one peninsula in this area that was completely rat free. Like, for some reason, the rats had completely disappeared
Hmm.
and hadn't come back. And so this group of scientists was like, we need to get down there and talk to these community volunteers and ask about the methodologies that they're implementing to get rid of this rat population. So they went down there and they interviewed the people, and the people said, well, it's very simple. We get together every Saturday and we pray that God would take the rats away. And we've been doing that for a year, and all the rats are gone and they haven't come back. And now all of our birds have returned and our forests are healthy again. And these scientists basically laughed in their faces and they were like, okay, that's not true and we're not trying it. But if you were truly looking for evidence, any kind of evidence, even if it was surprising, and you were willing to follow it wherever it went without rejecting it because of your preconceived ideas, you should, as a good scientist, be willing to consider that. Okay, get together every Saturday and pray that the rats are gone. That sounds crazy. But if you're truly ready to go where the evidence leads, why not try it? So I don't think that my belief in God and my belief in science conflict with each other. Like there's an ancient Latin saying, Deus et natura no frusta, which means God and nature don't act together in frustration. They're always, I mean, because God is Lord of the sciences, right? God created science and gave it to us as a gift, as a way to learn about his world, as a way to learn about how he made things. And so, like, there's no reason to say that, Henry Ford created the automobile and therefore the automobile and Henry Ford are in conflict with each other. That's not how it works at all. The more you understand Henry Ford, the more you understand his automobile. And that's kind of how I feel about God and science. That might be a weird analogy, but
I like it.
okay.
Oh, I think it's good. I've heard it said that science can explain the what, but God explains the why. Do you kind of look at it that way too? Like science can only go so far, and then there's a limitation to that, what we can know?
Yeah. I mean, so if we were to throw philosophy at that statement, we would say science can explain the ontological, but you need metaphysics to explain the deontological. So the ontological is, what exists. Um, like, the three of us are existing in space. We are physical bodies. We have a heart that's beating blood through our system. Like, we can explain all of our being in that physical sense. That's the ontological. And then there's another side of being that supersedes science, which is, why are we here? Or what am I supposed to do in my life? What's my purpose? What's my meaning? Um, why do I exist? What am I supposed to behave like or act as? Those are all questions that science can't answer. And there have been many who've tried to, employ science towards ethics as to get some kind of outcome. And every time in history that that's happened, the ramifications have been terrible. It doesn't work. These are non-overlapping magisteria. They're different things. And so I think there is a level of oughtness to the world, right? The question of how should it be? How is it supposed to be? And science can't answer those questions.
I want to ask you one last question, then I'm just going to let Noelle ask whatever she wants here, but I'm just finding it so fascinating talking to you. I know as an apologist, you're aware of different arguments for God's existence, or different things that you would say that you would use to explain to somebody who doesn't believe. Would you share the argument from beauty or from creation? Like, how would you share that with somebody who is going, well, beauty doesn't really point to God? Why would you say, well, actually, I think beauty does point to a creator?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I like how you set up that question, Janelle, because a lot of people will say the beauty in the world proves that God exists, and I don't agree with that. I think the beauty in the world is an indicator, like you say, it points very clearly to something outside of itself. Um, and there are a couple of angles that we can take here. One thing I always think about is caterpillars, you know, like there are so many incredible, beautiful caterpillars. You can buy books of photographs of caterpillars that are like this thick, and there's just every single species is completely different and they're stunningly, stunningly beautiful. Some of them, that their patterns are for camouflage, but a lot of them are just fancy, cool stripes and speckles and whatever. And they're just so neat to look at. And the fact of the matter is, there's no reason for that. There's no need for them to be so beautiful. There's no gain to them in a naturalistic sense, right? They're not breeding. Caterpillars can't breed. They're just beautiful for the sake of beauty. And we see this all over the natural world, from the tiniest single-celled algae to I mean, anything in creation. You see this striking beauty. And a lot of scientists will have a term for this that they call gratuitous beauty. And gratuitous beauty meaning there's really no reason for it. It's just there and we don't really know why it's there. But again, if we were to step away from the scientific question of what is it and into the philosophical question of why, and ask why is the world so beautiful? And not only that, but why do we have the power to perceive that beauty? Why are we able to see it? And why does it affect us so much? Because beauty, it does something to us, you know? It's like that feeling you have when you hear an amazing piece of music. Noelle, I love you. I know you love music. Or like you see a beautiful sunset and it just does something in your heart. You can feel it. Beauty affects us and it points us to what we call the transcendent, which means it's something beyond, something above. And it gives us this sense that there's something greater than just this physical world. Mm-hmm. You know, you gaze at the stars at night and you have this feeling of there is something greater beyond this universe that's weaving everything together. What is that? And people have tried to describe it. And some people say, you know, there's some sort of super intellect behind the universe, or I am trying to think of something that was Frederick Hoyle who said that. There's lots of scientists who have tried to explain this. But I think it's God. I think it's God. And the beauty in the world points to him. And there's this ancient saying that God wrote two love stories, the Bible and nature. Mm. And a lot of people don't read the Bible, but we all go out and see nature. And that's his love note to us, to say, I love you. You are here on purpose. You are not an accident, just like none of this is an accident. There are lots of other angles I could come at, but I feel like for the sake of this conversation, that's kind of what's on my mind.
Yeah.
Love that. Noelle, go ahead and ask whatever you want. This is a fellow scientist here, and Xandra's excited to talk to you. So you throw whatever, the hardest question you can think of, she can handle.
Oh, geez. Well, this isn't exactly like totally on topic, but I did really like what you said about he's just crazy.
He's so cute. Oh my goodness. I love him.
He's tearing down my pictures on my wall.
He's rearranging.
He is. Yeah. Yeah. Yep, there he goes.
We're going to need a picture of Dante for the show graphic so that he gets billing.
He
could be your new mascot, Janelle. Yeah. He could be like the mascot of the show.
Look at him. He's really going for it.
That's so funny.
Wants to get that tape. Oh, he got it. Okay. Good job. Glad he's just destroying my stuff. It's wonderful. But yes, you mentioned it really early on. You said something along the lines of people doing evil or bad things in the name of God. And that's something that is really important to me, because I can see like this, and it is like the free will of humans and how we are flawed, and like we get to choose what we do, and oftentimes it's not right, or it's not good. And it reminds me of like a lot of the corruption in the Catholic Church, and the sexual assault of very young children, in the name of God, saying God wants this for you, simply because this priest or this preacher, this pastor, has this power in the church, because they hold that stance, and it puts a lot of power and like authority on like a man, like just a guy, to interpret and tell people what and how to think, um, and teaching them like, yeah, we're just gonna do what we want and then say God wants us to. And it just it rubs me the wrong way. It's awful. It's horrible to hear about. And that's not super into the science aspect, but yeah, I just like, I don't know, the doing evil things in the name of God and like kind of having this power over a big group of people, um, who are taking what you say as fact, or they're believing it because you tell them, and then what they go and do. Like if you're saying, oh, like, yeah, you can cheat on your wife sometimes, like just sometimes, and then people go and they're like, well, that guy said I could. He does what God wants him to do, so I'm gonna do what he does. Um, and yeah, just humans aren't wonderful always, I guess.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I'm really glad that you bring this up because I think it's so important for all of us to have a pulse on this. Um, I mean, you mentioned the Catholic Church, and and that's part of why there was this break from the Catholic Church into Protestantism of, hey, we think everyone should be allowed to read the Bible and actually know what it says. And people burned at the stake for this, that they would translate the Bible into everyone's language so they could read it for themselves and actually know what it was saying. But that being said, the Protestant church has a lot of problems too. And I think this is why so many theologians throughout the ages have written about the dangers of religion and how religion can be used to manipulate and hurt people. And it's really sad. And again, whose heart does it break the most? God's heart. This is not anything that gives him delight or pleasure, which is why in his word he says, if any of you religious leaders hurt any of my innocent little ones, it's better for you to have a mill tied around his neck and for him to be thrown into the sea. That's how seriously God takes it when people in religious authority abuse and hurt other people. um, and similarly, in the book of James, it says, not everyone should be teachers because you're going to be held to a very high authority. And who's holding them under authority? Well, God. So I think that it's the examples that you give, Noelle, of, young people who are manipulated or hurt, especially in a sexual way, that really hurts to think about. And it just gives me so much relief to know that God is a God of justice and that he sees all of that and that there will be a reckoning for that. And none of that is going to just, God does not turn a blind eye to any of that. Um so yeah, I'm definitely not the kind of person who would be here on this podcast and say, "Oh, let's look at the history of the church. Look how beautiful the church has been and perfect it's been forever." No. No,
Yeah.
an honest reading of church history will tell you that um there's been, rape and pillaging of more poor countries. Like Spain came to South America and took all their gold away, and they're still kind of paying for that right now. There have been times when I've gone and I've spoken in Peru and other countries, and they're like, "Oh, you're Christian? We're not going to listen to you because of what Christians have done to us for generations." And I get it. In one sense, I get it. But here's the thing: I don't think any of us should reject the Christian message wholesale without knowing what particular type of Christianity we're rejecting. Because Jesus preached a gospel that is antithetical to what a lot of Christian gospels out there are preaching. And I don't think that it's right to reject Jesus and reject his message without actually knowing what that is. The people who killed Jesus ultimately were religious leaders, who were angry about what he was saying. The people who were always trying to get him arrested, who were angriest at him, were religious leaders. I mean, religious people did not like Jesus at all. The people who liked him, who came to him, were, the people everyone else was skeptical about, like prostitutes and the dregs of society and like this, that, and tax collectors and whatever. And the people that everyone else said, oh, you're not good enough. Those are the people Jesus went to and said, come and follow me. Come and follow me, follow my ways, and I'll give you rest from your burdens. So yeah, I mean, it's tough. The church is not perfect, but Jesus is. And I still think he's worth investigating, even though the church has messed up so much. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I'm not
totally.
trying to make a cop out. I'm just
Oh
saying,
no.
like,
No, no, no.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, yeah. Oh gosh, I like what you said. I don't think it was a cop out.
Okay.
It's not cool to reject something based off of the people that are in it, I guess. Or more like, yeah, if you don't know the truth.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I like the analogy of like you're listening to someone play. Maybe I shared this with you, Noelle, when we met, but like you were listening to somebody play a cover of Taylor Swift. And you're like, I'm never listening to Taylor Swift again because that person's playing Taylor Swift so horribly, right? Taylor Swift must be awful. And the friend who's a real Swiftie is like, wait a second, you have not heard the real thing, right? It's
Wait a
kind of
sec.
like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a good analogy.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
I guess my follow-up question to that, if it's okay for me to jump in here, is Xandra, you mentioned earlier, it's okay. God gave us free will. We get to believe what we want to believe about the world. Clearly, you believe when we choose to believe Jesus, it's an objective reality, right? It's not just about he's good for me. Jesus said, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life." Right? He didn't give an option to believe in him. Just you do you, I do you. I do me, and we'll just see what happens. Jesus said, objectively, this is who I am. So
Mm-hmm.
in an objective sense, what is compelling enough about Jesus to overcome the barrier of, I don't even want to be associated with that because of all the garbage associated with Christianity? Would that be a fair question, Noelle?
Mm-hmm.
I like it. Yes.
Yeah, I think a lot of this just comes back to who he claimed to be, because if it's not true, none of this matters. Like, these conversations might be interesting, might be cool to, hear what other people think about the world, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, because if he wasn't real and he wasn't God, then so what?
I should go get a
But if
real
it
job.
is true, yeah, exactly.
Make some
Exactly.
money.
But if it is true, it changes absolutely everything. Every facet of reality. I mean, Jesus came to turn the world completely upside down, and he did. I mean, he cut the calendar in half. He broke time in half. Do you know what I'm saying? Um, as a historical figure, there has been no one else like him. And as a spiritual figure, there's been no one else like him, because no one else claimed to be God. Buddha didn't claim to be God. Muhammad didn't claim to be God. Like Krishna, like all these, like they're not like, oh, I am the one and only God. He made some really, really big claims and said, here's what I'm going to do to prove that what I said was true. And then he did it. Because for him, the evidence was, I'm going to die and I'm going to be raised on the third day. And when I come up out of the grave, you'll know that everything I said was true. Because his own siblings didn't believe him. His own brothers and sisters thought he was a crazy person. And so for me, a lot of it, comes down to looking at the evidence for the resurrection. And as someone who's scientifically minded, that's something that you could do. Some of my favorite books on the resurrection were written by men and women who went out to try and disprove the resurrection once and for all, and then came away with a book of here's my conversion story because the evidence is so compelling. So yeah, I mean, Jesus, you hear people say like, oh, Jesus is my best friend. No one's ever loved me like he has. No one has ever understood me like he has or cared about me. And I know those are just sentimental words, but when you experience it, it's completely different. And I can honestly tell you that no one in my life, I think, got me until I met Jesus. I felt completely understood by him, completely like he would never ever reject me no matter what I did. Um, and there's a cost to following him, which is why it's not easy to make this decision. And that this is something you have to wrestle with and grapple with because, Jesus is not something you just tack onto your life. That's why it's called rebirth, because he completely refashions you and remakes you in a new way. And I picture it like, we're all born into this world with like a retrovirus, like a virus that's writing itself into your DNA, like AIDS or something. And we inherit it the moment we're born. It's like this thing that has written itself into our very essence, our very being. And that is called sin. And sin is more than just choosing the wrong thing or the right thing to do. I mean, sin is something we are born into, it's part of us ontologically. And when you have something like that, you need something outside of the system to come in and break that and be the cure. And Jesus is the one who came, who said, I am the only thing that can take that away and put things back the way they were meant to be, because the world is not how it was meant to be. And I think that's where the transformation happens, is when you put your faith in him, you start to follow him, and you start to experience that transformation. And the world is still broken, and it won't be perfect this side of heaven. But I'm telling you, in my life, I've lived in a lot of countries, I've seen a lot of people, I've seen a lot of things, and I've made a lot of scientific, discoveries and insights. And there is nothing more significant than the fact that Jesus was who he said he was. And I know it sounds crazy that someone would die and come back to life 3 days later. I know it sounds crazy. It sounded crazy then, and it sounds crazy now. But the question is not, does it sound crazy? The question is, did it happen or not? And if it did happen, what does that mean? Anyway, I could go on, but that for me, I think, has been the biggest part, is that he is who he says he was, and he loves me better than anyone else ever could.
Yeah, I like what you said about like the resurrection and like whether or not it did happen. And I had a question. Do you think the events in the Bible actually happened on this earth? Or do you think they're more like moral stories for us to learn from?
Yeah, so there are different types of writings in the Bible. Some of them are allegorical, like stories, and those I don't believe happened, because they're told as, like sometimes Jesus told parables about certain stories, but they were more allegories, so they aren't, historical fact. But the things that are written as narrative, as fact, I think they did happen. Now, I think our interpretation of those things aren't always accurate. And we can talk about that more, from a scientific standpoint. Some of the minutia of that people get really hung up on, and Yeah, I mean there are some things that I read in the New Testament that like really confused me of like this doesn't make any sense that this would happen, but then when I went back and looked at the cultural context, I thought to myself, "Oh, this totally makes sense." Actually. So, yeah, I do think that what's written in the Bible as narrative not only did happen, but I think is deeply significant for us to understand who we are as human beings.
Yeah.
Was there a particular thing in your head when you asked that? Like, was there something like a story you'd heard?
Yeah, well, I remember I went to a summer camp called Camp Gilead in Carnation, Washington. And they did a great job. They are a wonderful camp. And I they had us sing this song, and it was my favorite song, and it was called Millions of Dead Things. And it was basically like there really was a worldwide flood. Just look at the stony curse. Millions of dead things buried in rock layers all over the earth. So it's like fossils and bones and dinosaur stuff like that. Like they're telling us this flood really did happen. We have proof. What do you think?
Well, my parents co-authored a book on paleontology when I was a kid, and I went with them on some of these dinosaur digs.
So
And
cool.
like, I have some pretty strong opinions about flood theology. I personally think that it was a worldwide flood and not a global flood. And what I mean by that was the purpose of the flood was for a reset, was to not all Christians believe this, by the way. This is just my view. Okay, there's plenty of views on this, but
Right.
um, the purpose of the flood was there was so much debauchery. Humans were just like murdering each other, raping each other, like burning their own children to death. Like it was just awful. So he's like, I need to wipe out humanity. And I think that he did that and just saved Noah and Noah's family on the ark. Um, but there's no reason to believe that it would have to be global to do that. And also, from a scientific standpoint, I personally don't believe that the data set that we currently have for the amount of water on the surface of the planet, for example, and other things like that, um, with the timeline that we have, and certainly by that time, the Himalayas would have been in full formation. Mount Everest would have been in full formation. There's no way that water could have gone above that point, just mathematically speaking. And then you take, dinosaurs, and if all the dinosaurs were alive at that point, I mean, one hefty Parasaurolophus would have sunk that ark. I mean, we know the dimensions of the boat, we know the size of these animals. And I've heard people say, well, Noah must have brought dinosaur eggs on. And then I think, yeah, but doesn't the Bible say that they walked two by two? So if they walked two by two, aren't you just changing the Bible in one way to try and like not have to change another way? I don't know. But all that to say, like the Bible is not a scientific textbook. What the Bible is, again, is a love letter to God's people from God, telling us, I loved you so much. I loved my humanity and my creation so much that I would go through a reset to try and give another chance to humanity instead of just blotting them out because of their sin. And that's the story again and again, is that he's the God of second chances. And I think Noah's Ark is a beautiful story of second chances. And that's what I come away with when I read it, more than the science. But also on the side, you don't have to believe in a global flood to be a Christian. A lot of Christians don't.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
Does
like
that
what you
answer your
said
question?
about like worldwide versus global, and like what people what people's understanding of the whole world was at that point. Like we didn't have like mega jets. You can't just like get somewhere in 2 hours, you know. So like yeah, maybe this huge flood was as far as they could see, and that to them was the whole world, the whole earth. So
Yeah,
yeah,
makes sense.
yeah.
To wrap up, I have two final questions. One is just you mentioned some great resources for people who have questions about the evidence. Would you mind just sharing a couple of those for someone listening.
Maybe one of the things that came up was evidence for the resurrection. And one of those books is Who Moved the Stone? And that's a good book about, again, written by someone who was worried about people who he loved falling into this weird Christian religion and wanted to write a work that would once and for all show that this didn't happen, and then came away with a conversion story. So I like that book. I think it's really well written, and it's got a lot of the evidence that he found compelling for the resurrection. Let's see, what else did we talk about?
Beauty.
I can't think of any good books on that. Sorry.
I know our mutual friend Lexi had a great one. I'll link it in the show notes because I remember I downloaded it. I have it somewhere, but I can't remember the name of it. But it is a good book on that.
Is it written by Paul Gould?
Yes.
Is that his name?
I think so.
Yeah, that's a new book, and I've been meaning to read it. Please do link it because I want to read that as well.
We'll link Paul Gould's book.
Clearly, we need a book about this. Beauty pointing to God. Yeah. Like, that's not written for Christians or theologians or like scholars.
Yeah. All right, Xandra, final question. Always ask the same here. The Finding Something Real podcast is about a journey towards restoration, eternity, authenticity, and love. REAL is an acronym for restoration, eternity, authenticity, and love. Of those things that we can find in relationship with Jesus Christ, which of those 4 things stands out to you the most in your life right now, and why?
Restoration, eternity, authenticity, and love. Honestly, right now, at this time in my life, I think authenticity, because I feel like many of us are living in a world of just Instagram filters, and we're living in this fake world where everything has to be perfect and we have to be perfect. And Jesus says, "Come to me just as you are, warts and all." And he's so authentic and would never manipulate you or try to use you or any of the terrible things that we do to each other. His love is so authentic and so real. So for me, I think the authenticity of Jesus and the fact that he is who he said he was is what matters to me.
Love it. Well, Noelle and Xandra, thank you so much for being here. This has been a beautiful conversation. I'm excited for it to air. Until next time.